as you migrate towards, or as you converge towards, real-time asset tracking, a battery basically does not make sense anymore. And that's why, harvesting energy from the surrounding, especially, in the likes of what we at Energis are doing, right? Creating these wireless power network solutions that are very stable, that provide, very reliable power. It's very critical, because now you're enabling sensors to basically operate real time.
On this episode of Embedded Insiders, we're discussing the continued evolution of Ambient IoT with Gianpaolo Marino, Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at Energis. We're diving into battery dependency, the benefits of continuous always-on data for AI, and how the company's partnership with EPs supports battery-free sensor deployments through wireless power and energy harvesting. Next, Rich and Anna Levo, the Vice President of Marketing for the Thread Group, discuss the Thread standard. Thread is part of the IEEE 802.15.4 wireless protocol and operates at a very low power. The two discuss the importance of the protocol and the newly unveiled app that simplifies the process for developers. But first, Ken and I are talking about some recent Edge AI news. Microchip is strengthening its Edge AI portfolio with the acquisition of Halo AI. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Embedded Insiders podcast. I am Assistant Managing Editor Tiara Oliver, and Ken is back. You were gone last week.
I was. I took a little vacation to reset, recharge, and remember how to nap. It was great. That's right. I was visiting some old friends and camping in the woods. It was great. But today we're back on the technological front. The world waits for no camper. And there was some interesting news out there that you discovered.
Yes, it was the acquisition of Halo by Microchip Technology.
Yeah.
So they're now, becoming a stronger player in that Edge AI market.
Yeah, that's that seems to be the reason for the acquisition. Halo has been, if not known for their AI innovations and the way that they sort of accelerate edge AI processing in particular, and like robotics and vision and things like that. But it's an interesting acquisition. Microchip has expanded its AI capabilities via acquisition before. I'm trying to remember. It's happened a couple of times. The one in particular that I'm thinking of from the news release was Neuronix, I think. Neuronix AI Labs. That was for neural network optimization tech, especially targeted specifically for FPGA and SoC and that kind of thing. But the thing that I find interesting here is something that I have found myself talking about in the tech space forever. And it's an interesting thing because I want to talk about sort of what mergers and acquisitions does to a marketplace a little bit. Because, if you go back, say, call it 100 years, and you think about the big companies, there was railroads, there was oil, not that oil isn't still there. There was infrastructure, and there was banking. These were the big industries, the big the Gilded Age, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, these guys.
Right.
They were, 100 to 150 years ago. That was their sweet spot, and those are the industries they were dominating. And what mergers and acquisitions meant then was not necessarily about competitive advantage. It was about eliminating competition. Like, more often than not, they would acquire a company regardless of its assets just to take it off the board. Now that's not how mergers and acquisitions work. It's, or at least not entirely. See, mergers and acquisitions, especially in the tech space, work differently. They at least from my observations, they take all of this with a grain of salt. Those of you out there listening, I'm not, I'm not going to tell you that this is gospel or anything, but from my observation, mergers and acquisition, especially in the tech space, works like a lava lamp. I just used this analogy with Tierra before, but so you've heard this before. But in a lava lamp, you have the heat at the bottom of the lamp, which I will call innovation and invention, and the sort of new ideas substrate. That heat causes many, many, many bubbles to emerge. Those are the smallest companies, those startups, those new companies, those companies built on one technology that they're just trying to bring that one technology to the market. Then they start to rise as or combine as those small companies gain more market share, get to scale, mix with one another, and collaborate and partner. But if you jump all the way up to the top of the lava lamp, it's usually one big bubble. Now we're not that far. That's a monopolized, super corporation, whatever. But so the analogy sort of falls apart there. But near the top are several big bubbles, and those are slow moving, large, and there's very few of them. So as you move up the lava lamp, imagine an incredibly tall lava lamp. I can't believe I'm using this reference from the 70s, basically. Everyone out there listening, Google what a lava lamp is. Anyway, as these bubbles rise through the lava lamp, they're combining, they're getting sucked into bigger bubbles. And that is how innovation reaches scale now. It reaches the mass market, which is interesting, because what it means is that the consumer, like, even if you go back to like the 1980s and early-ish computing, they'd heard of Microsoft, they'd heard of Apple, those companies that still exist now. But Apple and Microsoft are not doing very much innovating. They are acquiring companies that are doing innovating.
Mm-hmm.
And, there is no, Bill Gates or Steve Wozniak working in a lab creating Windows or the Apple IIe, and it's at least at the big company there, because back then those were little companies, and so they had the guy there making a thing. That's what I mean when a company becomes big through mergers and acquisitions. My observation is that they do not they create iterative improvements. They do not invent, even if those iterative improvements are in and of themselves patentable. The patent system is a whole nother discussion that we can have. So what, to me, does that mean for the marketplace of embedded computing and technology and compute in general? What it means to me is that we are stable in a place where processors get incrementally faster and incrementally smaller, where edge devices get more robust, smaller, more powerful. AI is doing a interesting thing to this space, but in and of itself is not innovation. AI still works the exact same way it did 20 years ago. There's no difference in innovation there. It's just faster and using bigger data sets. So, like, what it means is that sometime within, I don't see the big inflection point inventions happening, broadly speaking, very rarely. And most of the time, those are not changing the same way that, like, the automobile did the world, the same way that the 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 microchip did the world. Those things were inventions that were inflection points. They made other technology obsolete and became ubiquitous across everything. Now, I don't see that happening, which, the in technology right now, certainly not in compute right now. What that means is that very likely somewhere at the bottom of that lava lamp, in one of those tiny little bubbles, one of those tiny little companies, there is somebody who's going to make that. So everything is 5 to 10 years when you make a prediction. So I'm not going to bother making a prediction. But at some point, somebody's going to invent something. I think it's going to have to do with either energy or um or uh processing. Like, I think somebody's going to create a materials science innovation for processing that will mean that we don't need data centers. Data centers to me are a bad technology that is simply it's the Betamax of compute. It is just an in-between technology, and it will not last. It is not sustainable. I don't think that they make any sense. So I think that either it's going to be about energy generation, storage, or transmission, or it's going to be about processing in such a way that we see something cool happen. But until that happens, I think we're just going to look at iterative improvements, and that's what we've been looking at for 15 years. I would argue there hasn't been a substantive invention in compute in that long, at least. So argue with me in the comments. Come at me. I'm here to stand by my thing. I dare you to tell me the iPhone was an invention.
Yeah,
So
I'm
that's my
curious.
rant for today. What do you think, Tiara?
I'm just curious. I'm curious to see what comes out of this acquisition and what we can expect in the future. You know, Microchip and Halo are both companies that we've written about often and that I've interviewed on the podcast. So yeah, I mean, I hope we can even maybe get an interview about
Yeah.
this. So
I would say absolutely try to get somebody in there. And you're going to be at Microchip Masters in August, which is a sort of microchip led event. Maybe you'll have a chance to talk to somebody while you're there.
yeah, maybe I'll have a sneak peek and some more information to come back to the podcast and share with you all.
Stay tuned, friends, and I mean it. Come at me in the comments. I want to see what you got to say. Send me your messages if you're listening to this on YouTube or whatever. Hit me. I'm ready for it.
Now, here's Gianpaolo Marino of Energis.
Yes. Hi, Tiara. Very nice to meet you as well. My name is Gianpaolo Marino. I am the Chief Strategy and Growth Officer for Energis. So my responsibility is primarily across strategy, business development, product development, as well as obviously customer interaction, strategic partnerships. Very nice to meet you.
You too. I know today we'll be covering a lot about ambient IoT, but for listeners who may be newer to the concept, how would you define ambient IoT and its role in wireless power play?
Yes. So I think ambient IoT, obviously, it's a very relatively new term that has been used probably over the last couple of years. But when we talk about ambient IoT, it's basically everything sensing around you, right? And really, when you start thinking about sensing, which we also call them, physical AI or the physical layer, you give the sensors, the ability to harvest energy from the surrounding, for the ambient, right? So sometimes, the sensor, will be able to harvest energy from existing Wi-Fi infrastructure, from existing, Bluetooth infrastructure, or, from, a technology in the likes of what Energis is developing, which is RF-based wireless power network solution. And so what is happening is that, now you're enabling sensors to basically harvest energy from the surrounding and be able to operate without batteries. Now, the reason why that is actually very important is because it's not that batteries are detrimental, to the sensor application, but they are. But in essence, a battery is basically just a power budget that limits the capability and the ability of the sensor to provide you like a piece of information, at every, I don't know, every time you need it. And so when the sensor is operating off of a battery, perhaps can only give you a piece of information like every 30 minutes or every hour. Why? Because hey, the sensor needs to last, or the battery needs to last for at least 2 to 3 years, right? So you can't pretend the sensor to give you a piece of information every 5 seconds. But that is actually a very important factor, because enabling the sensor to provide you a piece of information every 5 seconds takes you from what we call periodic asset tracking to real-time asset tracking, right? But now you actually can do that through Ambient IoT, because again, you have a reliable power source that the sensor can leverage, and it enables basically the sensor itself to operate without battery. So the sensor can give you much more constant piece of information that are very relevant to run operation across supply chain, for instance, in retail, in logistics, in manufacturing, in pharmaceutical applications.
Awesome. And about a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to interview EPs, and we didn't get to talk too much about the collaboration between your two companies, but can you explain, what inspired the collaboration and what problems you guys were trying to solve together?
Yes, so EPS is a very important company. It's a company that focuses primarily on semiconductor. So when you look at the sensor layer, right, what they do is, they do basically the power management distribution of the energy that the sensor is capable of to harvest, for instance, off of our wireless power network, right? So imagine, you have our wireless power network that is blasting energy. The sensor on the physical layer, it's capable of receiving that energy, and then that energy needs to be translated in voltage and current, right? That then, needs to be fed to the communication portion, to the sensor portion. So that basically power distribution is what EPS enables, right? EPS is capable of operating in very low voltage application. And so that is actually critical for us, because again, you're not harvesting, volts, you're harvesting microvolts, right? Sometimes, you can harvest, millivolts. And so having a power management IP that is capable of operating from such a low voltage and current is very critical, because then you're again enabling the sensor to be able to harvest energy from our network. So yeah, it's a very important building block that we see at the physical layer, at the sensor layer, and it's a building block that is basically enabling sensors to start harvesting energy from what we call ambient IoT.
And for applications, IoT applications, and other real sensing applications, how do you believe this perception of battery-free sensing has changed? In the most recent years, I know some people believe it has its batteries have their limitations, but what, in your opinion, what role do batteries currently play from a data and AI perspective? I know those are two questions right there, but
Yeah, I think batteries. There are some use cases where batteries are still very relevant. For instance, if we start talking about AGI, where you have sensing elements that have a lot more computing capability, processing capability, right? So having a battery there is very important, because they're operating at much higher power, right? And so I think a battery is still going to be very important in that source of application. But when we talk about ambient IoT, and when we talk about everything sensing in the surrounding, we are thinking about tags, right? Very small tags that are capable of, that have some sort of sensing element, that are capable of harvesting energy from the surrounding. And so a battery there will, again, it would be detrimental for many different type I would say use cases. Like the first one is obviously battery adds costs, right? And so as you start thinking about tagging billions of assets as they move across a different type of supply chain, adding cost of the battery becomes obviously something that is detrimental. So you sort of have to eliminate that. But again, I think the most fundamental thing that battery add to the equation is the fact that they can still force you to stay in some sort of periodic tracking. And that's what customers, today don't want, right? Everybody's migrating towards, real-time asset tracking, because again, as I mentioned before, right? if you do periodic asset tracking, every 30 minutes or every hour, right, you're sensing something, you're sensing the location of an asset, you're sensing the temperature of an asset, is in that dead zone that problems are starting to arise. Mm-hmm. And so when we describe these problems and we look at the problems across supply chain or, retail IoT, logistics, manufacturing, we're talking about $1.85 trillion, right, of asset waste every year because of the inability of customers, to really locate assets, real time, or to understand how assets are moving across their supply chain real time. And so a battery, does not fit that equation anymore. As you migrate towards, or as you converge towards, real time asset tracking, a battery basically does not make sense anymore. And that's why, harvesting energy from the surrounding, especially in the likes of what we at Energis are doing, right? Creating these wireless power network solutions that are very stable, that provide, very reliable power. It's very critical because now you're enabling sensors to basically operate real time.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of real-time asset tracking and, this as enterprises, start to require greater need for real-time asset tracking and automation even, how do you see ambient IoT becoming more important?
It's absolutely. I think it goes hand to hand, right? As more and more customers are seeing, the ability to really start focusing on real-time asset tracking, right? Start generating tons of data, right? Across, their operation, because that data is going to be very critical, right? Remember, the ability to generate tons of data is going to be very critical. And because that data basically feeds, AI, right? We always say that, hey, everybody talks about AI here in the cloud, but if you're not feeding AI with data, there is no AI. And so the ability, to basically start generating a lot of data through real-time asset tracking is becoming very, very critical. And this is the reason why ambient IoT is going to be much more relevant, over the next 3 to 5 years, because ambient IoT unlocks that data flow, right? From the physical layer, or what we say, the physical AI layer, all the way to the cloud where you're running your AI models, to basically make better prediction, better, to enable much better efficient process across your operation.
And how significant would you say is the role of sustainability and environmental impact when reducing or eliminating these batteries at scale?
Extremely important. There's trillions of battery that are getting discarded every year, right? I don't recall on top of my head, now, the exact numbers, but, we are like, it's trillions of these, disposable batteries, right? These coin cell batteries. The problem with, these batteries is that you cannot even repurpose them. You have to discard them, right? There's no way to, maybe a lithium ion battery, maybe you can repurpose, maybe you can add, some element to, make it work again. But when you talk about coin cell batteries, you just have to discard. And I think, that's definitely detrimental to, the sustainability claim that we often make. And so I think ambient IoT, it does have a very strong, sustainability leverage in the fact that we're eliminating these batteries. I believe in Europe or in the European Union, there is some sort of mandate that is supposed to start in 2027 or 28, where disposable battery are going to be banned in any sort of application, right? Just because, again, they are discarding those batteries, and unfortunately, they are very detrimental for the environment.
Yeah. That goes right into my next question, looking ahead and looking towards the future. In your opinion, how do you envision the growth of battery-free sensors evolving over the next couple years?
Absolutely. It's a great question. I think today, if you look at how many battery-free sensors have been deployed in the market, we're talking about maybe hundreds of millions. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be talking about billions, right? Mm-hmm. So the growth is going to be like incredible, over the next 3 to 5 years. Every year, I'm predicting that number of battery-free sensors is going to double, right? So if today, if this year, we are going to basically deploy 300 million battery-free sensors next year. It's probably going to be 600 million. The year after is probably going to be 1.2 billion, right? And so that growth is going to go up exponentially, right? As we speak, just because of, again, all the benefit that we have discussed, during this call, the benefit of real-time asset tracking, the benefit of not using a battery, the benefit of completely eliminating manuality out of the equation. Because remember, right, if you have a sensor that is operating with a battery, even if that sensor will last you 2 years, and when that battery decays, and by the way, you don't know, it's not very much predictable how a battery decays. Every battery has its own sort of like, decay, unpredictability, right? Having to dispatch someone, to change that battery and to reset the sensor, it's cost, right? That a lot of the companies, want to eliminate out of the equation. And so to me, when we think about ambient IoT, battery-free sensor layer, that's the name of the game. That's the future, right? And from my view, I think today in ambient IoT, it's really starting in in industrial enterprise application like retail, logistics, manufacturing. Eventually, it's going to morph into pharmaceutical. But the way I look at it is eventually going to come into our homes, right? Where now we're going to start deploying into our homes, smart homes, thousands of sensors, that are going to enable us, to make much more efficient decisions, across our home, whether it's energy, whether it's food that you have in your fridge, right? So I think, the level of sensors is definitely going to increase, and ambient IoT is going to eventually come all the way into smart homes and smart buildings.
Awesome. Well, Gianpaolo, those are all the questions I have for you today. But as always, I'd like to ask if there's anything I might have missed or anything else you'd like to add, or if there's anything else you'd like to tell us about what Energis is up to.
Yes, I think it's great. You actually mentioned about Energis. I think the role of Energis is fundamental, right, to the growth of ambient IoT and to the development of ambient IoT, over across many industry that we just discussed. I think what Energis is doing is really establishing a wireless power network solution that is the backbone of ambient IoT. It's the backbone that powers ambient IoT, because through Energis you don't only get power distributed right across your end application, but you're also now establishing a very secure data flow from the sensor layer of the physical AI layer all the way to the cloud. And all that basically happens through Energis. So think of us as we're energizing, but we're also collecting the data and we're pushing the data into the cloud. Further to that, Energis is also developing their own end-to-end solution, which means that we have also our own sensing solution on the sensor layer, which we call eSense tags, and we also have our own data measurement platform, which we call eCompass. So we're basically establishing this network, but we're also basically establishing the sensor layer with our own solution, and we are basically establishing a very efficient data management platform that helps our customers to basically make sense out of the data that they generate.
Now, here's Anna Levo for the Thread Group.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Embedded Executive Podcast. I'm Rich Nass with Embedded Computing Design. This week, my guest is Anna Levo, who happens to wear two hats. She's the Vice President of Marketing for the Thread Group, and she is a campaigns manager for Silicon Labs.
That's right. The corporate campaigns manager is part of our global corporate marketing team.
Well, before we get into Thread Start, because what I want to talk about, what does that job entail? What do you do at Silicon Labs?
Yeah, so at Silicon Labs, I'm part of the global marketing team, and we work really closely with our product marketing team and the engineers on bringing their stories to life. Essentially, they're the ones that are building the products and helping to define what the story is. And then it's my team's job to make sure that that story is being amplified across our different marketing channels. So whether that's blog posts or press releases or social media, emails, making sure that the story is getting to the right people.
So you're the liaison between the engineers who always tell the truth and the marketing people. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. So,
that, and with my background as a linguist, I kind of joke about that I'm kind of translating the engineering speak into, how the rest of the world speaks.
There you go. So for the audience's sake, we met last week at the Unify event, which is put on by the CSA, the Connectivity Standards Alliance. And one of the big topics there was Thread. And it actually played a pretty big role at the event. There was a lot of talk about it. And my question for you there, which I'm going to ask you again, this isn't a new technology. It's not a new protocol. Why all of a sudden is it in the spotlight?
It's such a great question. And I was really excited to see that last week as well, that, with all of the conversations around the future of the IoT, And really the future of IoT being based on IP, I think that's where Thread comes into the picture. Why now in particular? I think that there are a number of reasons. One of them, over the past couple of years, we're seeing huge amounts of devices being certified to the Thread spec over the past couple of years. In the smart home side, we see that being really tied to what's going on with the Matter ecosystem. As more folks are adopting Matter and they're looking to decide which transport they should be building their Matter devices on, looking at whether that's, Matter works over different IP-based transports, whether that's Wi-Fi, Ethernet, or Thread. As folks are looking to build devices that have power constraints, Thread is a really obvious choice. So as we're starting to see more of these products come to market, they need to go through Thread certification as well. So I think that's one aspect of it.
So I think you might have answered my next question, at least part of it. Seemingly everything is connected to Wi-Fi. So why not just build your device to Wi-Fi?
It's another really great question that we get. Wi-Fi was built for a different purpose, and Wi-Fi is great at what it does. If you need something with high throughput, like absolutely Wi-Fi is a great choice for that. So something like a camera device where you need to have all of that visual information transmitted, Wi-Fi works great. But for devices that have power constraints, so things like window sensors or door locks. Door locks is a really common one that we hear where consumers hate to have to change the batteries on their door locks. And so Thread, with its ultra low power consumption, enables you to have a door lock that then the batteries don't need to be replaced quite as often as they would if you chose to do something like Wi-Fi.
Does Thread, at least in its current stage, is it somewhat of a chicken and egg thing where if I build my device, I don't know if there's going to be enough devices to connect to it?
Yeah, that's another really great question. I think one of the challenges that Thread has seen is just educating the market on like how to build a Thread network. So we've seen some coverage of this where a consumer might bring home a Thread device and not realize that a Thread device also needs a border router device, the Thread border router, which in the Wi-Fi world, like it just seems so obvious. Consumers know that if they have a device, if they're going to bring home a device and connect it to the internet, they need to have a Wi-Fi router for that, right? You need to have that access point to actually to connect it. And the same is true for Thread, that Thread needs a Thread border router for those devices to connect and create the mesh. However, Thread border routers are now being built into devices that a lot of consumers already have. So I think this is the other reason why I think we're starting to see more Thread devices in market is because of the proliferation of the Thread border router. The Thread border router is built into a lot of common like smart speakers that are available in market from the major ecosystems. They're being built into TVs and other streamer applications. And as Matter just recently announced their HRAP device type, so that's the home routers and access point device type. For folks who want to bring those kinds of devices to market with Matter certification, they also need to support the Thread border router. And the whole purpose there is that if consumers bring home those Matter badged devices, they should just work. And so by proliferating the Thread border router, it's starting to become easier and easier.
Might it be integrated into a Wi-Fi router?
Yes, that is the intention. Absolutely.
Is that happening today?
We haven't seen it yet, but I've had some conversations with folks, and I expect to see that we're going to start to see more of that soon.
That seems like such an obvious choice, but is it? I know when you get into different protocols and the same equipment, you run into interference issues with your antennas and things. Is it hard to design something like that?
Gosh, that's a great question. And I have not heard any kind of difficulties around that from the folks that I've worked with. But I can dig in and get back to you on that with some more technical specifications. But
Okay.
no, I haven't heard that that's necessarily a challenge.
Now you said it's the border router is being integrated into devices like I can't even say the name because the box on my desk is going to light up and ask me what I want. But the speaker that's on my desk, as well as the television, does that act as your hub?
So it can act as thread border routers can be part of the Matter controller. That is essentially the hub or the administrator of the Matter network. So yes, it just kind of depends on how the network is set up and which devices come online first. So like in my home, I've got 2 smart speakers. Actually, I've got 3 different smart speakers that all have thread border routers built in, but the one that is kind of the main border router is just the first one that I turned on. And now the rest of them kind of just join that same thread network.
Is there a way to know whether your device has a thread border router in it?
That is another great question. So last week, one of the things that the Thread Group announced is the Thread Tools app. So this is a new app that we launched in beta last week. It's available on iOS and Android. And essentially what this tool will do once you open up the app on your phone, you just tell it to scan the network for your Thread devices, and it will surface any Thread devices that it finds, including the Thread border routers.
That actually sounds like something we shouldn't just gloss over. Where would somebody find that app?
Yeah, so you could search the name of the app is Thread Tools. You can find it on both the iOS App Store and the Google Play Store. But I can also send you a link to share with your listeners from the Thread Group's website that has those direct links that they can download it. I should mention it is available on Test Flight and the iOS store right now because it's still in beta. But I'll provide those links to make it easy for folks to download.
Is that an app for developers or for home users?
So really it's both. However, the initial phase and the first phase that we're in right now, it's really meant for developers. We had been getting some feedback within our membership that, of course, the silicon providers do their lab testing of kind of how these networks are formed and how they self-heal and so on and so forth. But that's often very different from how consumers are actually deploying these networks in their homes. So the original intention was to provide that layer of visibility to developers who are building these devices in more real-world applications.
Okay. Now, Thread predates Matter. So is it backward compatible? And where I'm going with this is I'm asking about the security that comes with Matter. Are the older versions of Thread as secure as the newer versions that are Matter compliant?
Yes, absolutely. Thread was really built to be secure by design. And really the security that we see in Matter is a little bit different from the security mechanisms that we've implemented in Thread. Thread was built, I think the key differentiator for Thread is the fact that it uses cryptographic keys instead of user-generated passwords. So, for example, if a consumer brings home a Wi-Fi router and they want to configure their settings, they can go in and change their password, right? But oftentimes they come with those default passwords, and having default passwords, as we know as an industry, is not a great practice. So Thread from the beginning decided we don't want to do that. We don't want to kind of leave it to potential user error. And so we've implemented those secure cryptographic keys from the start. Matter on the other side, some of the security mechanisms that they're employing, like the device attestation certificates, that helps. And by using the distributed compliance ledger, that blockchain technology that allows basically, it allows a Matter administrator device, when a new device comes online, it can check that the DCL, the distributed compliance ledger, to say, hey, was this device actually Matter certified? Is this a legitimate certificate? And it says yes, and then it onboards that device. So it's kind of at a different level from the security that Thread provides at the network level.
Very good. So last question. Let's look into the crystal ball a little bit. If we're having this conversation a year from now, what are we talking about? Like, what are the goals of the Thread Group over the next year?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other features that we talked about last week at Unify is a new feature that we're building called Thread Direct. And that's going to enable, the intention there is that it will enable direct point-to-point communication between Thread devices. And so what we are envisioning for that feature is that it will essentially remove some of that day one friction that consumers sometimes experience. In that, if they bring home a device, they don't realize that they needed a border router, or maybe they don't have a smart speaker in their home. Enabling that point-to-point connection will allow for consumers to onboard those devices using devices that already have Thread built in. So you might have seen some announcements. I think Broadcom made an announcement that they were supporting Thread in their silicon a number of years ago, maybe a year or 2 years ago. Qualcomm also made an announcement earlier this year that they're also supporting Thread. So we see that the silicon that is available today for chipset manufacturers or for mobile device manufacturers is having Thread built in. And so as we're seeing more of these mobile phones supporting Thread, we see real potential for people to be able to bring these devices online without needing the Thread border router. Now, the Thread border router will remain a critical piece of the Thread infrastructure, but I think that I'm hoping that in the next year, we see more of those home router device types start to support the Thread border router, and then also having this Thread Direct mechanism where consumers can connect these devices using their mobile devices. I think we're really going to start to see Thread proliferate everywhere, and it will be easier to build with some of the things that we've been, resources that we've been rolling out, and then easier to use by consumers as well.
Just plug it in and it works, right?
That's the goal, man.
Because of your lips to God's ears, is that what they say? Very good. Well, I certainly hope that comes true, and I thank you for your time for helping to educate the audience a little bit.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Rich.
That was Ann Olivo. She is the Vice President of Marketing for the Thread Group, and she is the I got this wrong before
Corporate
too.
Campaigns Manager.
Corporate Campaigns Manager for Silicon Labs. And I am Rich Nass with Embedded Computing Design. Have a great day, Ann.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Embedded Insiders. For more daily news, videos, and podcasts, visit our website at embeddedcomputing.com.